Hello, today I'm going to be reviewing the P480 from Sahara Gaming, which is their latest flagship case. It comes in two different versions. There's the one with a tempered glass panel on the front, which I have, but there's also a mesh version. And both of them are currently on sale on Sahara Gaming's website for less than £90. So I know what you're probably thinking when you look at this case. It looks an awful lot like the O11 Dynamic Evo. But Sahara Gaming being more focused on budget-orientated products, this case has a budget-orientated price and is actually half the price of what you pay for the O11 Dynamic Evo. So if this case actually turns out to be any good, it should offer incredible value for money. So let's dive in and take a closer look at it. So to remove the tempered glass side panel, you first need to remove the top panel. It's held on with a captive thumb screw at the back, and once it's been loosened, the panel can simply be pulled backwards and lifted away. Taking a look at the back of the panel we've just removed, you'll notice there's no separate dust filter, but as most people are going to be having the top of the case as an exhaust, this shouldn't create any problems. So you'll notice the tempered glass side panel has quite a dark tint to it, and with the top of the case removed, the side panel can simply be lifted up and away. If we take a look at the other side panel, you'll notice that it has an area of perforation, indicating that we're going to be able to side mount fans on this case. This panel is removed in exactly the same way. With the top removed, it's just a simple matter of lifting it upwards to remove it. If we take a look at the back of this panel, you'll notice we have a magnetically attached dust filter over the perforated area. Taking a look at the front of the case, you'll notice we've got the Sahara Gaming logo at the bottom and our front I/O towards the top. Taking a look at our front I/O, we've got a power and reset button, a combined headphone and microphone jack, we've got two USB Type-A ports and a single Type-C port. The tempered glass panel at the front can simply be pulled away. It is also possible to remove the rest of the front panel by simply pulling it away. So you might ask why you're going to need to remove this panel. There's no actual reason to remove it for the build, but if you did want to change it out for the mesh panel comes as a single front panel, whereas the tempered glass version that we have comes with a front panel in two separate pieces. So at the moment you don't seem to be able to buy the mesh panel as an optional extra, but I would imagine this is something Sahara Gaming will do in the future. Behind the front panel we've got a removable fan bracket where you can mount up to two 120mm fans. The only slight issue I can see with this is we've got the tempered glass version of the case. The fans are going to be right up against the tempered glass, where they're going to contribute absolutely nothing to airflow, and really their only purpose is going to be aesthetics. To remove the front fan bracket, there's two screws we need to remove, and then the bracket can simply be tilted into the case and lifted away. So one slight problem I've noted with this front fan bracket when I tried to line two Lian uni fans up with it, that only one of the fans actually ends up lining up with the holes in the fan bracket. This is because Sahara Gaming have used exact holes rather than elongated slots, giving you some adjustability in where you mount the fans, and Sahara Gaming want you to mount two fans with a slight gap between them, so this obviously doesn't work with Lian uni fans. Moving into the main body of the case, you'll notice that the case is quite long, and Sahara Gaming have gone with a dual chamber design. So over at the front of the case, you'll notice we've got this perforated area protruding into the case, and your power supply is going to be mounted behind it. So on this perforated area, you're going to be able to mount either two 120 or two 140mm fans. And again, unfortunately, the fan holes are actually in exact positions. So again, two Lian uni fans isn't going to work. At the bottom of the case, you can actually mount up to four 120 or two 140mm fans. Because the power supply compartment protrudes into the case, and that's the reason why you can only install two 140mm fans, and there's not space in front of the power supply compartment to mount a 140mm fan. If you prefer, at the bottom you can mount up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. At the top of the case, it's again up to four 120mm fans, although this time you can fit an extra 140mm fan with up to three at the top being supported. In terms of radiator support, at the top it's absolutely massive, up to a 480mm radiator, although if you prefer to use more standard sized AIOs, you're going to be able to fit either a 360 or 280mm radiator. Finally, at the rear of the case, it's up to a 120 or 140mm fan or radiator. In terms of motherboard support, as you'd expect in a case of this size, it's up to EITX, and if you want to go with CPU air cooler, it's up to a maximum height of 185mm. In terms of mounting your graphics card in the case, you'll notice we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets, but this whole bracket is rotatable, There's 5 screws you need to remove at the rear of the case, and the bracket can be rotated around 90 degrees, allowing you to mount your graphics card vertically in the case without the need for an extra bracket. It is important to point out that the riser cable you're going to need to mount your graphics card vertically doesn't come with the case. In terms of graphics card support, it depends how you're going to be mounting your graphics card. If you mount it horizontally, the power supply compartment is your limitation, and you're going to be limited to a maximum length of 340mm. If you mount it vertically, because it actually sits further towards the middle of the case in front of the power supply compartment, you've got the whole length of the case in up to 480mm. At the bottom of the case, we've got a full length magnetic dust filter which can simply be pulled away. You'll notice we've got a cutout at the bottom of the case into the power supply compartment. So the reason this cutout is here is to give you access to the on-off button in the bottom of your power supply. Moving into the rear compartment, we've got a perforated door over where the power supply is going to go. We've got 3 screws we need to remove, and then the door can be opened. So the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 200mm. You're going to point your power supply on the removable bracket at the bottom of this compartment. It's held on with 2 screws at the bottom, and once these have been removed, you're simply able to pull the bracket out. You do also have the option to fully remove the door. There's 1 screw at the top and 1 at the bottom, and once these have been removed, the door can simply be lifted away. So because the power supply is going to be at the front of the case, but you generally plug your cables in at the back, we do have an extension cable to go into the bottom of your power supply. So it's good to see that we've got cutouts in all the right places, and the 2 large cutouts over to the right hand side of the motherboard have rubber grommets on them. We've also got a rubber grommet over the cutout coming directly through from the power supply compartment. In terms of drive mounting, we've got 3 of these removable drive brackets installed at the back of the case, and on each of these you're going to be able to mount either a 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drive. In the case accessory box, you also get an additional 2 of these drive mounting brackets, allowing you to mount an additional 2 2.5 inch drives in the main compartment of the case. So what I want to do now is give you a look at the build I put together in the case. So I think you'll agree the build looks great, but what about the temperatures? So our Ryzen 9 7900X being cooled with a 360mm AIO at the top set to exhaust, idled at 44 degrees and reached a maximum of 89 degrees during a 10-minute AIDA64 stability test. The Tough Gaming RTX 4070 Ti idled at 27 degrees and reached a maximum of 68 degrees during the stability test. In terms of noise levels, we had an average noise of 37 decibels at idle and 54 decibels under load. To put those temperatures in context, I used exactly the same CPU, GPU and AIO in the LANCool 216 recently, where the CPU and GPU both ran 3 degrees cooler under the same stress test with similar noise levels. It is important to say on that build I was using a different motherboard. I was using the stock fans on the AIO, whereas in this build I used Lian the Uni fans on the AIO, and in that build the GPU was mounted horizontally, whereas in the SaharaGaming case it's mounted vertically. So summing that up, temperatures in the case were actually fairly good, not the best I've ever got, but very acceptable. The next thing I wanted to do was take a look at the fan mounting locations at the side of the case, because I did have some concerns that they weren't actually doing very much, given the fact that the power supply was actually blocking a large part of those fans, and I was sort of worried that the fans there were really just for looks. So one of the things I did during the build was, after I installed the power supply, I did pack up this compartment with all the fan cables. Because I was using cable extensions, I didn't have a lot of room for them elsewhere. So what I did was I removed all the cable extensions from the build, allowing me to clear the top of the compartment above the power supply, and then reran the thermal tests again. So looking at the temperatures with the cables above the power supply removed, this made absolutely no difference to the temperatures, and the only change was the PC was 1 decibel quieter under load. So this added some support to my argument that the side fans probably weren't doing very much, given that the power supply was actually blocking up most of their intake. So what I wanted to do was test, did they make any difference at all? So I went ahead and removed the side fans altogether and reran the thermal testing. The only difference here was our CPU ran 1 degree hotter during the AIDA64 stability test, and without the side fans our PC was 1 decibel quieter during the stability test. So we've got our answer. The side fans in this case make no significant difference to the temperatures, and I think that's largely because we've got the power supply blocking up the compartment behind them. And really their only purpose in this case is aesthetics. And the fans actually play a pretty big part in terms of aesthetics, because when you remove them, because we've got a perforated area which has been designed for airflow, you're able to see your power supply through it, and it just does not look good at all. So the side fans don't do anything other than improve the look of the build, and that was exactly my same impression with mounting fans at the front of the case. Because we've got the tempered glass version of the case, the fans were going to be right up against the tempered glass panel, and that was the reason I didn't use them in the build. But I can't just assume they're not going to do anything. I'm going to have to do the thermal testing to prove that they don't make any difference. So adding in the front fans, the only difference in terms of temperatures was that both our CPU and GPU ran 1 degree cooler during the AIDA64 stability test. However, this came at the cost of significant noise, with 3 decibels of extra noise at idle and 2 decibels of extra noise under load. So although as expected the front fans did very little to improve the temperatures, they did actually look quite good at the front of the case. And this got me thinking, if you did get the mesh version of the case, as well as looking good, they might actually potentially improve the airflow. So I didn't actually have the mesh panel for this case, so I did the next best thing, and that was removing the tempered glass panel. And this should give me an idea if you got the mesh version of the case, provided the mesh wasn't particularly restrictive, would having fans mounted at the front potentially improve your temperatures. So with the combination of front mounted fans and no tempered glass panel at the front, our CPU temperatures came down by 2 degrees at idle and 3 degrees under load, and there was no difference to our GPU temperatures. So summing up the thermal testing, mounting fans at the side of the case doesn't seem to be a good idea. If you've got the tempered glass version, as expected, fans at the front isn't a good idea. If you've got the mesh version, based on the testing I've done without the front panel on, hopefully having fans at the front will not only improve the look of the build, but also improve your temperatures. So now I want to come on to any issues I had during the build, and being such a large case, building in it was fairly simple. Really I had a couple of problems, and I've already mentioned the issues I had with the Lian Uni fans mounting on the side and at the front, and the fact that the fan holes didn't line up. So if you're going to be getting this case, Lian Uni fans is not the way to go. The only way I could secure them in this build was by screwing in one of the fans and leaving the other fan without any screws in it. Fine for a YouTube build, but not what you want for your long-term build. The other issue I had when it came to mounting the graphics card vertically, and with the rear fan installed, you weren't able to get a screwdriver in to remove the PCI expansion slot covers and allow you to install your graphics card. So what I would recommend doing is installing your graphics card first if you're going to be mounting it vertically, and then install the rear fan. The final thing to mention was cable management, and how I managed the cables was putting them all into this compartment above the power supply and then closing the door. And doing this looked to be one of the cleanest builds that I actually did, and cable management was really straightforward. I did have some concerns that doing this was going to affect the airflow, but we now know from the thermal testing in this case that having fans on the side makes no difference to the airflow, and really the only use for that space then above the power supply is actually to pack all your cables into and make cable management really straightforward. As well, having that rubber grommet coming directly through from the power supply compartment meant that you could actually keep all your power supply cables coming directly in from that power supply compartment rather than bringing them into the back of the case where cable management would be more difficult. So doing cable management in this way, building was actually fairly straightforward. So this brings me on to the things I liked about the case, and at less than £90 you're getting an awful lot of case for your money. And I don't just mean that in terms of the case's large size, it's in terms of the features that you're getting. So you're getting tempered glass on the front and on the side, you're getting a fairly good build quality. We've got rubber grommets, we've got a separate power supply compartment with a nice door over it, which I thought was a really nice touch, and we've got front panel Type-C as well. Another thing that I liked was the rotatable GPU support bracket. So again, that's going to save you some money in buying an additional bracket. All you're going to need is a riser cable. And as well, in the case, you shouldn't have any problem fitting all your hardware in it. and I really like the idea of having 4 fans along the bottom and at the top. So there's an awful lot going for this case given its budget price point. So this brings me on to the things I didn't like about the case, and while there was a lot I liked about it, there was definitely a few things that I think could be improved upon. The first thing I didn't like, and this may well be personal preference, was that there was quite a dark tint on the tempered glass panel. So much so that when actually all the lighting in the build is turned off, you couldn't really see into the system at all. Although when everything is powered on, I had no problem seeing in through the tempered glass into the build. The other thing that, again, may be somebody's personal preference, some people will love it, others will hate it, is that this is quite a large case in the lengthwise. So you're just going to have to make sure you've got enough space on your desk for it. So I've already mentioned the issues I had with the front and side brackets not working with the Lian Li Unifans, and I think really what Sahara Gaming should do is have elongated slots on these brackets, allowing people a bit of freedom about where they place their fans. The other slight issue I didn't like about the front fan bracket, obviously it doesn't make a lot of sense having a front fan bracket in a case with a tempered glass panel. Really the fans at the front are there purely for aesthetics, although it is good to include the bracket because I imagine in the future they may offer a mesh panel as an optional upgrade. The other slight issue that I do have, if you're going to use a fan mounting bracket with a tempered glass panel at the front in terms of the aesthetics, which really is its only purpose, it doesn't look great having a gap above and below the fans. What would have been better was allow you to mount 3 fans at the front so it filled the space out, or if you were only going to allow 2, to have put a cover at the top and at the bottom blocking out the light. So another slight issue I had with the case was it only came with 6 of the standoffs you would need for a full-sized ATX or ETX motherboard, which, to be honest, this is what most people are going to be using in this case. So I can't for the life of me understand why Sahara Gaming didn't install all 9 of the standoffs. But what is probably even worse is the fact they didn't include the standoff insertion or removal tool. And the standoffs that they're using are actually quite large. I did try another standoff insertion and removal tool from a different case manufacturer, and it was too small to fit over the standoffs. So in general, I think you should set up a case for the way most people are going to build in it, and leaving 3 of the standoffs in the case accessory box that the majority of people are going to install and not including the tool is really unforgivable. So another thing I wasn't a big fan of was the mesh over the power supply compartment. If you're not actually going to be installing fans on the side of the case, you're going to be able to see your power supply and all the cables at the back of it. And I do think a solid panel or some sort of cover over this, if you weren't going to be mounting fans, would have worked better than leaving the perforations. The other slight issue I have with this compartment is its location, and I just don't think it works as well as having it at the back like it is in the Lian Li O11 Dynamic Evo. So having this bump at the front of the case means that when you look in the tempered glass window at the front, you can see less of your build. The other slight issue is that the motherboard is then recessed right back along the case. You've got this bump at the front, and then you can't really see very much through the narrowed window of the tempered glass panel. The Lian Li O11 Dynamic Evo is the opposite way round. You've got your power supply at the back behind the motherboard, so the motherboard hides your power supply and leaves you plenty of room for your cable management. And this sets your motherboard slightly further forward, so when you look in the tempered glass panel, you can actually see it much easier from the front. Because you don't have the power supply there, it's actually recessed back, meaning you've got a better view of things. And the other issue as well is you're able to use the side of the case for proper airflow in the Lian Li O11 Dynamic Evo, whereas I've shown with the thermal testing in this case that the power supply blocks the side intake and it does absolutely nothing for the thermals. So I do think there is some major design flaws. And what I would recommend if you were redesigning this case is you would have the motherboard sitting slightly further forward, have the power supply behind it. That's then going to leave you loads of room for your cable management. It's then going to mean you're going to have the side of the case completely free for your fans. It's going to look better and it's going to function better. The only slight problem with that is if you do that, it's going to be the Lian Li O11 Dynamic Evo. And Sahara Gaming did have to make some changes so that they can't be accused of just copying the O11 Dynamic Evo. The slight difficulty with the changes they've made is they just don't work quite as well. So we've now reached the stage in the review where I'm going to tell you should you go out and pick up this case. Now importantly, during the review process I have compared the case to the O11 Dynamic Evo because they do look very similar. Now importantly, this case is not as good as the O11 Dynamic Evo, and I think that's largely due to the design choices that Sahara Gaming have gone with. Putting the power supply at the front doesn't work both in terms of airflow and in terms of aesthetics. But importantly, this case does not cost the same price as the O11 Dynamic Evo, so we can't really compare like with like. This case is actually half the price, so it's half as good, it's probably worth picking up. And I think it's probably more than half as good, and it actually has an awful lot going for it. So I think whether you should get it depends on the type of system you're planning on building. If you're somebody who's building a really high-end system where you demand the best airflow, you're looking for brilliant cable management, lots of removable brackets, you might want to reverse the layout of it and have lots of configurable options, moving the I/O to different compartments. The O11 Dynamic Evo is the case for you, and you won't be happy with this case. If you're somebody on the other hand who is trying to save some money, you're happy with a mid-range system, I don't think the airflow issues and the aesthetics are really going to affect things that much. And as you can see from the build I put together in it, you can come up with an absolutely stunning build in this case that you're going to be very happy with. And importantly, you're going to save yourself a lot of money. So I think it is important to remember that this case costs less than £90, and that really is what you're paying nowadays for a budget case. And it looks so much better than a lot of the other budget cases out there. So I think Sahara Gaming have done an absolutely incredible job with this case, and I think there is just a few wee tweaks they need to do to it to improve it, and hopefully going forward we'll see some of these in the next version of it. But if you are somebody who's out there looking not to spend an awful lot of money but get a good looking build, I can most definitely recommend this case to you, as long as you are aware of the limitations that I have pointed out. If you are thinking of doing a build in this case, remember I have done a full step-by-step build guide to it, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. If you have enjoyed this review, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.